There are a ton of YouTube videos out there about how to be a great game master in a tabletop RPG. But today we're going to talk about what it takes to be a great player instead. Hello and welcome to the Wizards of Eem podcast. I am your co-host, James Parks.
And I'm your other co-host, Ben Costa, and we're the creators of Land of Eem, Rickety Stitch and the Gelatinous Goo, and Dungeoneer Adventures.
Today we wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a player and how you can be a better player at the table. And it's something that Ben and I have talked about and thought about a lot of times because we come from a perspective of players becoming GMs as opposed to forever GMs.
Right. And there's a lot of crossover between player and GM. They share some of the same principles, but there are some key things that players can do to not only help out their GMs at the table, but their fellow players. Now, what is the player's role? And we're going to take a view of this specifically from Land of Eem, but it can apply to any game. First thing you want to do as a player is, own your character. You're more than just a stat sheet. Role play your character. Get into it. Approach it from the perspective of a real person.
Yeah, and one of the key ways to do this is to really figure out who the character is, understand what makes them tick, what are their motivations, what are their flaws, what are their ideals. And Land of Eem has some tools in it to help create that character so that you feel more comfortable slipping into their shoes. Like Ben said, it's not about just stats and paper buttons that you push on your character sheet. It's about who this person is and taking ownership of the character.
One really important thing is when you're being your character, don't let dice rolls speak for you. Say what your character says. Embody your character's voice. And that's not really like you have to speak in a voice, but say what your character is actually saying. You can paraphrase.
You don't have to come up with an accent or anything like that. But being able to say what you say really opens up the game and makes it easier for a GM to engage with you as another character, like an NPC or perhaps even an adversary.
Yeah, and it makes it less of a dice game where you're like, all right, I'm going to deceive this guard, and you just make a deception check or whatever.
Yeah,
no,
it's like,
you have to say what you're actually doing, how you say it, what's the content of your words. That's
say, hey, your shift has ended. I'm going to take over for you. That's something we could say to the guard. Not just always finding yourself in a situation where the GM might ask, like, okay, what do you do to deceive the guard? And then that can break up the gameplay. Freedom of choice. Your character should do what your character would do. That doesn't mean that you always have to take the optimal solution towards something. Sometimes your character may make a bad choice because of a flaw that they have. Enacting that and playing through that actually creates a lot of conflict and challenges and exciting moments that make it easier for a GM to engage with your character as well as to buddy up with the rest of the characters that you're playing with at the table.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes for a more fun experience when you're playing into your character's flaws. You're acting the way your character would act, even when it's suboptimal. Like, case in point, last night we were playing and Zeros the unicorn has a thing against vampires. It's not optimal to attack a vampire, but he does it. And he forces the combat on the rest of the group, which is fun because that's who his character is.
Yeah, it creates conflict. And it doesn't always need to be something that's so perilous, potentially, like, you punch a dragon in the nose because you hate dragons. No, it could be something more simple. Like when we were playing our Bogtown campaign, my character, Hooch, had a flaw of not really understanding how money worked. So I'd always spend all the money that I would ever get all the time. And it drove George insane.
But it was
George,
also hilarious. And
it was also hilarious. I would pay full price for a hot dog or something like that. And he would be like, what are you doing? It was always great, and I was always cash poor and looking for ways to use my rascal abilities to find more money or more treasure. And it was just a little thing that added a lot of dynamic fun and conflict to the game.
Obviously, it's a balance that you got to strike when you're playing suboptimally. You can't just derail the entire game because that's what my character would do.
Yeah. You don't want to be a jerk for sure and ruin everybody's night.
But if you play it right and you're subtle with it, you can make for fun, interesting moments.
Yeah. And then the last thing for what a player's role is in a TTRPG is to highlight some of that character depth by building on relationships. Land of Eem, we could have entrenched this into the character building and to the growth of everyone's personal quest and how they relate to each other. But relationships are a big deal. How they change, how they shift, how current events or conflicts have shifted who your character might be, something they've learned. These are great ways to develop a character that is a lot less one-dimensional.
Yeah. And Land of Eem, as we mentioned, sort of sets us up for you where you have an ideal flaw, personal quest, and relationships.
Yeah, and relationships to the other players.
And so keeping those in mind and playing towards them is a huge boon to sort of the camaraderie at the table. It's always better when you've got some sort of relationship going with each PC, and that drives the action eventually.
And it also doesn't need to be something that you have to come up with on the fly. With Land of Eem and many TTRPGs, one of the best practices that is recommended is a session zero, where you can just hang out with your friends or your group and start to hash out what some of these relationships and how your character might be really will play out in the campaign. I know it's important for me when I'm making my character to get a sense of who the other characters are and how we might know each other or how our different personal quests might intertwine. And it's a really fun exercise in general. It's session zeros are great.
All right, so let's sort of touch on role playing in practice. Okay, so let's talk about kind of how you put all this stuff into practice. And the biggest sort of thing that you want to do, especially in Land of, is direct your own gameplay as a character and a player. What looks interesting to you? Where on the map do you want to explore? What rumors that the GM is giving you sound interesting? And how are you as a player driving the gameplay with your fellow players? It can't just all be on the GM to hand you a plot every time and like you're following the rails. That's never the best time.
Right. And it may not come naturally for you at first. You might be a shy player, or you might be playing with a group that you're not familiar with. It's not a group of friends, but you met them at a convention, or maybe you're playing a game at a local game store. One way that you can get over that is, of course, you have a conversation with the other players beforehand about how your characters might interact with each other. But you could also start small by having, some phrases that you can prepare to communicate about who your character is or how they might react to a situation, or even small quirks like they've got some sort of a nervous tick, or they have another gimmick that they engage with. Maybe they sweat when they're trying to lie, or things like that.
This is not just a singular player doing the work. It's every player at the group, and your job should be making the GM's job easier, facilitating more gameplay. Like the GM will love you if all the players at the table like know what they want to do and aren't like constantly saying, wait, what are we doing again? Like, because that's the worst, when everyone forgets why they're doing something.
Yeah, when they all forget what's going on. One tip for how that can be avoided is if one player is pursuing something or has a particular idea or presenting a solution to a problem, back them up, work with them, like support each other when ideas come up or where there's character moments. Support each other and play off of that moment. It actually ends up being a little bit like improv, where you propel yourself into role playing in a way that makes it really fun for the GM to engage with an NPC or to see where all this hijinks might end up.
Yeah, that kind of goes right into our next category of ideas, is cooperation at the table, collaborating with your fellow players on what their characters are trying to achieve, as well as the outcomes of dice. In Land of Eem, the dice mechanic is very collaborative, and it's incumbent upon you to think of results, brainstorm, workshop them with everyone at the table, and help the GM brainstorm. Ideas that spark other ideas are super valuable at the table. Even if you don't think it's a great idea, just brainstorming and workshopping is, I can't tell you the number of times that I rely on everyone else at the table as a GM to feed ideas for the outcomes of die results. And it just makes it more fun for everyone.
Yeah, and that actually dovetails a little bit into how you can make it more fun for everyone. Great players give each other the spotlight.
Yeah.
So if there's moments where that you're using a particular ability, or you're using an ideal or a flaw or a quirk, or you've reached some sort of a narrative precipice for your personal quest, give that person the spotlight, support them in that moment, and it creates so much goodwill at the table, and it's so much more fun. And GMs really appreciate it too, because it highlights what's important to each of the individual players.
Yeah, and all of these things that we're talking about like intertwine with each other.
Yeah.
If it's like the Buddy Boubet show at first, and he's leaning into all of his ideals and flaws.
For those who don't know, the Buddy Boubet show is the actual play campaign that we're currently playing.
Well, I meant like if you're like taking the spotlight as your character, Buddy, for part of the quest, part of the session, you'll know to kind of pull back after a bit and kind of include everyone, maybe include the other players with your relationships and sort of factoring those in, and or trying to include them in your personal quest. Don't just make it all about yourself, because that can get old, and it can feel like you're sort of directing the gameplay by yourself when all of this is a collaboration.
Exactly. You're never going to be able to succeed on your quest by yourself. So why should you be the focus of the quest in the first place? It's a team effort. You are a fellowship. The idea that one person's story eclipses all the others is something that you should probably avoid if you want to be a great player.
Yeah, no question. If you're a great player, you are inclusive.
Yeah.
And you support others' creativity. The biggest like tenet of improv is yes and. You don't say, no, I don't want to do that, or like, no, that's lame. Like, when someone is being creative next to you at the table, like, to be a good player, you will support their creativity and build off what they're saying, not just smash it into the ground. You work with everyone's ideas. It can feel really sort of discouraging when you're coming up with ideas at the table and no one is listening to you. They're just kind of like, oh, we'll just do this. It's going to be better. So it just makes you sort of shut up and be quiet because no one's listening to you.
Yeah, that's not fun for anybody. And so yes and is a core element, I would say. It's something that we do all the time. It became second nature to us in our own games, and even in our professional side when we're writing stories, because often using the tool of yes and, you can perpetuate an enormous amount of creative solutions that all have their merits. And something that may not get used in that point of the quest, maybe you don't swing in on a chandelier right at that moment, but the seed has been planted so that next time that scenario comes up in that quest, swinging in on a chandelier is the obvious choice, because everybody got to see how that could have played out the scene beforehand.
Yeah. So, closing thoughts. Being a good player requires you to be in tune with your fellow players and the GM, and to be in a supporting role of everyone, and learning to strike that balance of taking lead when things are slowing down and sort of directing gameplay, but then pulling back when you're trying to involve everyone at the table. And it's fun. It's not something that should be stressful, because ideally everyone at the table should be doing this. It's like a give and take.
And you really embrace that freedom of choice, where sometimes you make decisions that don't exactly serve the party, but they serve the character in a way that creates dynamic conflicts, or creates those moments where you need to collaborate to come up with a solution or navigate around a particularly hairy problem. And not being afraid. Immersion. Yeah, it creates immersion, not being afraid to embrace that failure. And that's something that Ben and I have talked on the podcast about before. Embracing failure is often one of the better ways that your character can help immerse themselves in the world, can help other characters rise and show up in that spotlight. And of course, a GM loves conflict. So, be comfortable being imperfect. Be comfortable just, seat of your pants and having fun with it.
It will take the game in really interesting and fun directions. And like I was saying, it'll make everything more immersive if you're embodying your character and you are lifting up your fellow players.
Yeah. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining us for the Wizards of Eem podcast. If you are interested in checking out Land of Eem, go to landofelem.com. You can download the free quick start guide for free. You can also purchase the books from Exalted Funeral or ask your local game store. And of course, huge shout out to everybody that supports Ben and I on Patreon. Without your support, we would not be able to do the podcast, our actual play, or put out so much playtesting material every month. We really appreciate the support that you give us, and we hope that everyone listening will join us next time.
All right. Thank you.
Farewell.